Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to another edition of ILEETA Live. It's May already. What is this? 2 months after the ILEETA conference, and I'm still stuck in the lobby here, waiting for next year. Wait. So, just a real quick note. I just got off the phone with Harvey, and he wanted me to remind everybody that June 1st we start taking instructor proposals for the 2024 ILEETA conference. So, start pounding your head, thinking of a topic to put down, and June 1st it opens up.
Gee, I wonder what I'll teach.
Can't wait to see, especially some new faces teaching at ILEETA. Pretty anxious.
Hmm.
Got quite a few this year. So myself, Todd Fletcher, Joe Willis. We always have a great time with these
Up, guys.
guests, and we have our wonderful guest Ken Murray. Ken, for those that don't know who Ken is, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I've been around the industry for over 3 decades now. Started a little company with a colleague of mine back in the mid to late 80s. The original company was the Armiger Police Training Institute, and we started a company called Simunition and found the concept of projectile-based training intriguing. And so we were able to turbocharge that a little bit, create a technology. When this thing to stun, create a technology that allowed us to utilize conventional weaponry for opposed force training. And that just sort of took us by the hearts and the hands and dragged us forward into where we are today. There's been so many changes in that space since then. And so I continued to teach in the space with the Reality-Based Training Association, got that thing going, continue to teach classes on all of the various aspects of what we call reality-based training. As we speak more about that during this conversation, we'll get a little bit down into the weeds about the meaning of words, because language matters. And I've been doing that ever since, and had been away from ILEETA for far too long. I remember the old ASLET back in the day when Ed Nowicki created a member-based organization and sort of got a little bit behind the power curve with all of that, and found himself a founder without an organization. And when that didn't quite go as planned, started ILEETA, and became the organization that it is today, and proud to be a member of that, and not really quite sure why I got away from it, but had some really good friends of mine that were going to be there teaching this year, and Harvey and the ILEETA family were so kind to me to be able to carve out a little bit of space to spread a little bit of the existing and past word about all of this. So very thankful to the organization, and I don't think other than illness, I'll miss another one until the end of time. It's a great organization, and proud to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Well, we surely missed you the last several years. I think last time I saw you was Chicago, I believe, and I don't remember Wheeling probably.
Yeah,
So
been a while.
It's been a while. We're glad to have you back.
Well, thanks.
So talk to us about Simunitions. Where did that start? How did that come about?
It was the Great Canadian Adventure Game. I was living in Ottawa at the time, and one of my dearest friends, a police officer up in Canada, did interesting story behind him. He was involved in one of the most notorious shootouts in Canadian police history. He engaged a couple of bank robbers from Montreal in a small little bedroom community called Bayshore, Ontario, just a little suburb of Ottawa, Ontario. Him and his partner got into a gunfight with some people that had come down from Montreal to murder some Brinks guards and make off with the loot. And Robin and Ralph, my buddy's name Ralph, got into a tussle with these guys. Robin is quadriplegic today, got shot in the back of the head by one of these banditos. And Ralph got into a gunfight with a couple of the other ones, shot and killed one of them, had revolvers at the time. And back in the day, the The concept of speed loaders was far too aggressive for the organization. They thought, this is too aggressive. We don't want to have anything to do with this. But that was back in the day when the RCMP had upside down, backwards holsters, and the concept of police having guns was really reprehensible to a lot of police administrators, and made it really, really hard for them to do anything with them. And Ralph ran his revolver dry, and had been shot in the face, and took out some of his teeth, and was laying down his patrol car calling for help. He couldn't get to his shotgun. They were locked in a cage in the trunk, as all shotguns ought not be. And this guy stood over top of him, and just started shooting him. Bam, 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 bam. Ralph had been to a street survival seminar. And from that teaching, he learned to get his legs up in front of his body mass, and was able to protect his head. And the guy's semi-automatic pistol failed, and it malfunctioned, and the guy blew the smoke off it, twirled it like a cowboy, and laid it on Ralph's chest, and just slowly meandered off hopped into a car and drove away. And so Ralph, interesting guy. And so Ralph came back with a vengeance, ended up winning Toughest Cop Alive the following year, a grueling physical competition. Nobody was going to keep him down, although it didn't do much for his ability to draw any sort of disability pay. So, how do you do that when you get shot up and then you go win a competition like that? And so Ralph put together something called the Great Canadian Adventure Weekend, and took us all out to his cabin, or his farm, really, out in Quebec, Canada. And it was the first time I ever played paintball. I thought, that's fun. I really want to do that. I had some land and thought I would buy some guns. How hard could it be, right? And I flipped open the yellow pages that existed at the time, and sure enough, right there, the yellow pages under paintball was where you could buy these guns. And I called up the guy in the phone book, and I said, I want to buy some guns. He said, well, you can't buy any guns. You got to franchise a field. I said, oh, no, you don't. You just don't. Just sell me some guns. He said, well, go get them somewhere else then. And not knowing that there was really no other place to get them. So I thought, okay, well, I'll make him my friend. And so Dave and I ended up becoming very good friends. He ended up being best man at my wedding. And we stayed together for a while. And through the paintball experience, he recognized that there was a lot of police and military people coming out independently to play. Certainly the institutions weren't interested in any of this, but the individuals were. And it was amazing to us to notice that people that had not been trained in police and military experiences were able to defeat on the paintball field those who had. And so we thought, well, there's something there. What there is there? And it was just, well, you learn how to get out of the way of a projectile. And so under the influence of coffees and crullers and Cafe Wim in the Byward Market in Ottawa, we started talking about, wouldn't it be cool if we had a conventional weapon style gun that could shoot paintballs? And it so happens that the guy that had built his gun for him, Ted Szabo, that owned a company called Para Ordnance, a plastic company in Ontario near Toronto, this guy came up with a really, really interesting design. And it was a cartridge-based paintball gun that had a primer system in there. The way the thing was designed, it would actually fire the primer backwards, and all of the energy from that backwards primer would put the energy into a bolt group that would cycle this thing, and residual energy would bleed off and fire this paintball at between around 800 to 1,000 feet per second out of this thing that looked like a Mac 10, little mini Mac 10 machine gun. And I mean, it was really cooking. You can still Google it today, the Model 85, M85, and it was too fast for any type of paintball field, and so it had no recreational application to it, and today would be a prohibited weapon in Canada. But Ted Szabo talked to David and I, and through Armature, we were able to get the institutional rights for this thing and started looking for opportunities to sell it. And I was down traveling through the States and found myself in Norfolk, Virginia, and happened upon a guy named Dan Jasinski from the 5th Counterintelligence Team for the Marine Corps. And we got talking, and I showed him this thing. He said, well, that's really, really interesting, but we'd have no call for that. But I know a guy. And he took me through the back door of this nondescript building which was Dev Group at the time, and the Naval Special Warfare Development Group. And he introduced me to a guy, and he's in this cubicle. There was a picture of a like a cartoon, and there was a king, and the king is has his back to the door, and he's looking through these shattered shields and broken swords and busted up helmets. And his knight says, "Sire, there's a weapon salesman here to see you." And the guy's in a shiny suit with an M60 belt-fed machine gun. And the king says, "Tell him to piss off. Can't you see I'm preparing for warfare?" And doesn't even turn around. And underneath, he'd written, "Never be too busy to see the next cool thing." And so he said, "Show me the next cool thing." I said, "At your service." And I showed it to him, and he said, "That's a pretty cool thing, but we'd never use like a Mac 10." I said, "No, no, no, but this is for tactical training. This isn't for precision marksmanship." He goes, "Yeah, you keep telling yourself that, son. We need functional fidelity." And I didn't know what he meant at the time, but he said that if we could do it in SIG pistols and MP5s and M16s and M4 platforms, that they would be interested in it. And so we talked to Zabo, and we had to start downsizing the cartridge from this large 375 caliber paintball cartridge to something smaller, and we had to come up with a more ballistically stable projectile because those paintballs weren't. And we launched just a massive search for how we could build a projectile. And it happens to be the same projectile that's in use in the FX marking cartridge today. We came up with that shuttlecock design, and that in and of itself is just an engineering, both a fiasco and just a marvelous work of innovation to be able to get this thing to fly with a marking substance that would break on impact. And all of the different things we tried, from the candy industry to cosmetics to you name it, we tried it. Hiring ballistics engineers and all sorts of people. We ended up having to get a chemist to come up with it was a myralgia, I think it was, came up with the goop inside, and just filling up the initial projectiles. We had Dave was the commanding officer for a cadet corps, an Army cadet corps, and his son was an officer in the cadet corps, and so we had all of these cadets sitting there with syringes filling these things up. We called them goopers, so because they were putting goop into our little the caramel and caramel bar, right? And so we built this whole thing up, and the Navy stroked an order for this idea, and Zabo was going to engineer the guns, and Dymaco, the machine gun company for Canada, the ones that makes the Colt knockoff for the Canadian forces, the C7, the C8. They were going to build the conversion kits and the guns, and SNC, the main ammunition plant for the Canadian, they were originally Canadian arsenals. They were going to build the ammo. We were going to do the marketing of this thing, and Zabo, a year later, we're going, where's the beef, man? Where's this thing? And he said, "Well, I haven't made it yet. I wanted to see how this was going to go." And so he said, "So new deal. I want $1 million in cash and 51% of any company set up to run it, and a 15-cent royalty on every round." And it just stopped us in our tracks. It just ended the whole thing. And despite the fact we now have a government contract and government support, the Canadian Department of Defense Programs Bureau, and the two biggest defense contracting names in the industry in Canada, I mean, we were ready to go. And we had to start again. And through working with just a brilliant engineer, the guy actually wrote with Frankfurt Arsenals, one of the original black books of improvised explosives. A brilliant guy. And he came up with that telescoping cartridge design that's the heart of not only our marking cartridge, but every other cartridge that's out there. UTM copied it. They tried it first with an air munition cartridge. It was the air munition stuff. And, Mike Saxby, another brilliant engineer, looked at our cartridge and modeled it with an air cartridge. It was just too expensive to produce, like $70 a cartridge for those cartridges to fire those things. And he thought that they'd be forever reloadable. And ATK, Rick Huffman was the original guy that came up with the cartridge that was eventually promulgated by ATK, the Force on Force cartridge, but that was the design of a guy by the name of Rick Huffman, again, another brilliant guy. He got kind of hosed in that whole deal. And so all of these things have kind of fallen out since then. And once we had this cartridge in place. Now we got to actually sell to somebody. We had one main military organization, but everywhere we went, we were told we're not going to do that here. I remember trying to teach at ILEFE in the early days, and the president of ILEFE at the time told me I would never be allowed to teach at ILEFE, that I was violating the safety rules, that I was pointing guns at people. We can't do that in law enforcement training. And the military said, we're never, ever going to do this. We're never going to play paintball in the military. And now they spend hundreds of millions of dollars and have acronyms written around it. And so it really did move the ability to do opposed force training in a world-class way forward. And so seeing that the technology was taking hold, there was no book I could read, no course I could take. My history with all of this was from paintball. That was essentially an elimination technology. The only close thing like it was the Miles system in the military, where you get shot by a laser beam and shuts off your vest and your gun stops working and goes beep, 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 and off you go. So there's attrition technology on the battlefield where it's just a bunch of people against a bunch of people and whittle it down until you decide to stop the game. But it taught you nothing about individual ability of winning gunfights. And when I start seeing what we were doing to people in training, I find somebody said to me, we'd shoot the crap out of people, right? Because we were the opposing force, and we'd hide in little hidey holes and be the ninjas and the trunk monkeys and pop down and shoot people in the back and say, "Oh, I see, you should have looked up." And we made every single mistake that a trainer could make, not knowing what we were doing, thinking that we were doing something great. But all we were doing was preparing people for failure, you see. And through the years, I started really questioning the psychological underpinnings of all of this. And so, first of all, I had to write courseware to start teaching people how to use the technology. And SNC, who eventually bought the company and still owns it, and SNC got bought by General Dynamics, so now General Dynamics owns SNC, that owns Simunition, and that's still the paper trail for the technology. But originally, they didn't want anything to do with courseware. They thought, if we tell people what to do with our stuff, then they can sue us if they do those things. And I said, you're going to get sued anyway if you don't tell them what to do with it. Because I'm telling you right now, they're out there doing stupid stuff with it. I know, because I'm one of them, right? And so I had to change my evil ways and really take a different look at what we were doing to people in training. And that's a very deliberate phrase. And so if you think of the computer model of hardware, software, and operating system, we had the best hardware in the world, but there was no software or operating system. So I had to write the software on to make the hardware work, right? But then what I realized is that we were in the operating system business. We were brain scientists messing around inside the experiential minds of other human beings with rusty instruments and zero formal training. That we were having an effect on people's future performance. And if we were not preparing people for success, then we were programming them for failure. And how dare we? And so I became what I like to call an accidental psychologist, right? I had to really get involved in how the brains were processing these things. And I became a hypnotist years and years ago and was studying neurolinguistic programming and all of the stuff that we're using to influence the conscious and the unconscious mind. And so I'm there today still trying to proffer the message. Number one, that the safety message is necessary in order to use any technology safely. I don't care if you're using video machines or if you're using conventional munitions or if you're using marking cartridges or laser beams or rubber guns or just the theater of the mind being one of the most powerful places that you can change future and past behavior. And so I dedicated my life to that, and here I am today just trying to reboot and get a larger megaphone, because when I start seeing, as we pointed out at the beginning, just prior to going on air, the number of dead guys at the back of Training at the Speed of Life, which is just unacceptable. One is too many, but the fact that over and over and over again, still 2 deaths a year in simulation training, and way more injured, and even those, if that was it, then it's a numerical thing, right? It's a high risk endeavor, and there's going to be problems in any high risk endeavor. I think it was not Conrad Lorenz, Gonzalez, Lawrence Gonzalez, that wrote Deep Survival: Who Lives, Who Dies, and Why. And he said that in any high risk endeavor, if you're going to have airplanes, there's going to be airplane crashes. You're going to have mountain climbing, people are going to fall off the mountain. You're going to have surfing, people are going to drown. Said it's a natural part of any high risk endeavor. But the thing is that really troubled me. And I thought, well, but I'm going for zero casualty. Said, well, catastrophes must happen as the nature of high risk systems. They don't have to happen to you and me. And so I've set myself on a pathway of trying to educate everybody that I can, starting with the language that they use, all the way up to the processes and procedures that we use in order to really take back the terrain of optimizing human performance. So I'm Ken Murray. Hi.
Yeah, I love that because the history behind it is something I knew parts and pieces of it, but I didn't know all of that. And I think one of the great things about that introduction was it not only told us about you and your history with FX uh, marking cartridges, but with how we got there. And you kind of led into your book, Training at the Speed of Life. And this is my volume 1 from I think it was 2007 when I trained with you. But one of the great things about that book, and if you're a trainer and you haven't read that book, you're doing yourself and your students a disservice. I'll just put that out there.
Thank you.
But one of the great thing about that book is it gives you the protocols. It gives you forms. It gives you ways to set up your scenarios with your role players, with your safety officers, with your safety zones, your perimeter zones, and everything else. And then the end of the book tells you why. And those are the people that have been killed in training, and not one of them should have happened. But tell us a little bit more about this book and the process that you went through in order to make what for many of us is truly the Bible of force on force and reality based training.
Well, I think we've all got books in us. Writing books is easy. Finishing them is really, really hard. Just and as I was driving through Arizona. I think I was stopping through Phoenix, and I'd been driving across the country listening. It was right around Thanksgiving coming up, and there was a woman on, I think it was NPR or something. Not quite sure I was listening to them, but it was a compelling narrative. And a woman by the name of Barbara Kafka was talking about 500-degree everything and how to cook a 500-degree turkey. And she's got a book called On Roasting. And I'm going, well, that sounds compelling because I always wreck any sort of holiday bird. And so I got to find this book. And as I'm walking through the Barnes & Noble or some analog of them, I see this book on roasting, and beside it is another book called On Killing. I'm going, that's interesting. I better pick that up also. And I see this, dog-faced pony soldier kind of on the cover of this thing, just sunken eyes and just this really compelling tale by Lieutenant Colonel Grossman. And I read it. I couldn't put it down. And he was still working at the Rat Lab at West Point at the time. And I reached out to him, trying to reach him. I'm going, this is really compelling stuff. And the law enforcement community needs to know about this. And wasn't able to reach him, but I showed it to some folks at Orlando PD, where Frank Repass was one of the vice presidents, great guy, Silver Fox. He's a really wonderful man. And he was a vice president of ILEETA. And so I gave it to him and a couple of other guys, and they started reading it. This is really good. Let's see if we can get Colonel Grossman out to ILEETA for one of the conferences. And so they were able to reach him. Would you like to come and teach the law enforcement? He goes, yeah, sure, why not? And so they brought him out, and it was a small but enthusiastic following for the first presentation. And he just caught fire when people started to hear his messaging among the psychological aspects of actually killing another human being. It was really a missing puzzle piece for me, because we knew about, technology and the training, but what about the psychological aspects of lethal force and dangerous encounters, right? That was really the first look I started taking seriously about what are we doing to people in training, and what is training doing to people deliberately? Are we programming people for moving toward the sound of gunfire or not? Because if we're going to put people in harm's way, then we have an obligation to prepare them as best as we can to not only win those fights, but also come back whole. At the Reality-Based Training Association, we talk about the 7 survivals, where physical survival is only one of the important 7 pillars, and we can teach a monkey to win a physical fight. Just give him a bigger hammer than the other monkey, and he's going to stay tenaciously involved and win that fight. But physical survival isn't just all that, right? We still need there needs to be some emotional and psychological survival. There needs to be some sort of social survival. We've got to all things physical. We've got to maintain our mission, our cause, and our calling. So spiritual survival. Right now, we're just crushing the spirit out of law enforcement officers. When you start looking at the hammer locks that we're putting on those that are being put in harm's way, how can you even get up in the morning and be inspired to do your job when you're not being allowed to do your job, right? And so we're crushing the spirit. I was listening to IADList last week, I guess, and Kevin Gilmartin, he wrote Emotional Survival for Law Enforcement, great book. And Kevin was supposed to be keynoting, and he wasn't able to be there. But the guy delivering the whole thing is just such a wonderful and important message. But this is one of the things that we're really crushing out of people. Are we able to have a financial survival? Right. Right now, it's, I think, $1 billion with a B dollars in Ferguson, Missouri, after what happened with Michael Brown and Darren Wilson. And by all accounts, once you go through what happened there, he was exonerated on every single level, and yet the guy's unemployable, and kind of a crushed spirit in doing the right thing for the right reasons, and the city's on fire. So how do you survive that financially, right? I did some work recently, a little seminar to the Florida League of Cities, and it's a shared risk pool. And so when the risk managers come in, for some reason, there seems to be a perception that training and paying out lawsuits come from a different bucket. They don't. It's the same taxpayer wallet, right? And so risk managers should embrace high quality, high fidelity training, because if we take an actuarial look at what happens when we actually train people properly, all of the good things are going to go up, all of the bad things are going to go down, and during training we'll see the tall bad poppies pop out. I've seen in my training scenarios people that should not be in law enforcement. We put them into a compelling scenario and they do things that are just absolutely criminal, and then try to justify what they did, saying that if that happened tonight on the street, they'd do it again, and have to star chamber them out of the organization. But aren't we glad it happened here, right? So that we see that sort of thing happen in training, such that we can either retrain somebody or train somebody in the first place. Quite often in a scenario, we'll find out that people never received the training to begin with, or it just didn't take because of the methods of instruction. Quick plug for Chris Butler and For Science for the methods of instruction people. Another great program that if you're going to be a law enforcement trainer, and I know there's a lot of compelling law enforcement trainers in some organizations, it's raising death threats. It's a reason to be, right? It's a great scientifically based how we get stuff into people's brains to make it stick. Right, which is, again, the name of a title of a book, Make It Stick, on how we can create durable learning. And so what I've been doing over the years is trying to compile all of these methodologies into a meaningful program that allows people to train on purpose, rather than just look at the calendar and say, well, what have we been doing block training this year? And then try and make some stuff up in order to make it interesting, because we got to pound somebody through in their 2 to 4 days of block training that they get, right? And so, but there's no durable learning there. Every class I teach, and I've been doing this for decades now, I'll ask, show of hands, how many people believe that qualification is a demonstration of gunfight proficiency, and no hands go up, and yet we still do it, right? Why is it that, as smart as we are within our organizations, that we're still doing stupid stuff? Right. And so we're missing the boat because we're on the wrong dock. And we really need to think more deliberately about these things, train on purpose with durable learning capacities for people. And it's really not that complicated. We all know about the OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, and act. But once you get to the A in the OODA loop, to the act, as a police officer, there's 4 things you can do. You can talk, you can fight, you can shoot, or you can leave. And if you come up with a 5th, let me know, and I'll name it after you, and I'll make you famous, right? But that's it. And so, how can it be that we're falling apart so catastrophically when it's just that simple? And it's because we're not training on purpose, and we're not creating durable learning, and we're not training to an end state. Now, every tool that we have, whether it's tung fu, gun fu, or kung fu, right? The stuff's going to work, not work, kind of work, or then work, then be overcome. And so we need to have very well-trained role players that are nothing more than high-quality stimulus machines that are going to draw out performance-based activities that we should have taught somebody in the first place, and then see whether or not they know what they're supposed to do. And if they know that and it's too simple, well, now we can make it more complicated, right? And so there's a lot of moving pieces to all of that. And so I don't know if that answered your question, but yeah.
I want to ask you why. So there's a few different thoughts going through my mind. You said so much there to unpack. It's going to take a minute, but we do the same thing over and over again. We know that, like you said, raise of hands, where you at on this?
Mm-hmm.
Your opinion. Why are we still doing it?
A couple of reasons for that. My whole thing is we're missing the boat because we're on the wrong dock, and change is hard, right? We change one of 3 ways, just one of 3: evolution, psychotherapy, and emotionally significant events. That's it, right? Evolutionarily means we change over time, but that doesn't necessarily mean good change over time. It just means change over time. And because there's such a lot to get done, if we try to make big changes, we get resisted. That's just the nature of the system. It's a homeostatic system, which think of that as terms of the thermometer on your wall. The thermometer on your wall doesn't care less about your comfort. It could care less. It cares about set point, right? And so if we try to turn the temperature up too high or too low, someone's going to complain about the temperature, right? Hey, don't touch the thermostat. In fact, they'll build a box around it and lock you out, right? And so anytime we start to try to make these changes, if we want to make meaningful change, we need to pick a direction, know what the end state is, therapeutically as well. If I'm going to be doing some therapeutic work with somebody, first thing I need is end state. Right? If we think of the Lewis Carroll Alice in Wonderland story, Alice is wandering down the road, comes to a fork in the road where she encounters the Cheshire Cat. And she asks, which direction should I go? And the cat says, well, it depends on where you want to end up. She said, well, it doesn't really matter where I end up. She said, well, it doesn't really matter which direction you go. And that's really a metaphor for what goes on in law enforcement. We think we know where we want to go, but we really don't. And so what happens is we start getting pilloried with the news story of the day. Law enforcement kills about 1,000 people a year. Well, those are the stats. We've been killing about 1,000 people a year for a number of years, right? And when you look at the stats on that, 95% of those killed by law enforcement gunfire are just, that guy should have got shot. When you look at all of the legal and the moral and the ethical and the pieces of why we actually deliver lethal force to another human being within the constraints that we have, 95% are just, that needs to happen. About 3% are, once you parse down far enough, you go, okay, I can see why that happened. And there might be 1 or 2% where you go, no, that never should have happened. We hold those people accountable. We either failed to train them or we didn't catch them doing the stuff that they said they were going to do. But when it comes to bad apples, and every society has them, right? And law enforcement is a society. Every society has them. We want them gone too. Get off my team, right? And so, but what happens is that occurs, and then YouTube and an agenda-fed media starts getting involved and starts driving a narrative that is just not accurate. Law enforcement are not overly horrible people. They're really good people doing a really hard job, and yet they're getting painted with a broad brush for the bad things that happen when we want that to we don't want that to happen either, right? And so that's the emotionally significant event, right? We got 200,000 medical malpractice deaths a year. 200,000. Where's the defund the doctor signs? And I'm not suggesting that that happens, not by a long stretch, but by orders of magnitude. Medicine gets a huge pass where law enforcement does not, and they're both extremely stressful professions. And medicine, I think it takes 7 to 8 years just before they even let you out of the can, right? Before they allow you to be doctor. What is it, like 840 hours to be a cop? It takes longer to become a hairdresser in the state of Florida than it is to become a police officer. And yet we try to hold these really hardworking men and women accountable to an impossible standard, and then tell them that we haven't got the money to train them. We've got the money to pay out $1 billion with a B dollars when things break. So I think that there's a lot of systemic issue, Joe, that we really need to address, and it requires courageous leadership and the ability to lobby more. Every single police department has a PIO, public information officer. Who's your publicist? Who's out there making deposits in the emotional bank account of the community when times are good? Where's the big blue table, right? How can we pull a lot of people in around this table and be making these emotional bank account deposits before things break? If we were to be able to bring the Critical Thinking Foundation in and do a town hall, if you would, and relitigate some of the Rodney King thing. Let's relitigate the Michael Brown, Darren Wilson thing. Let's relitigate Freddie Gray, right? Let's take a look at these things, and from a critical thinking perspective, let's ask what we want to happen there. If you were to, which is kind of what happens with the grand jury, right? They're going to be given some evidence, and they're going to have to figure out, but now they get to see all of the evidence. People that are jumping up and down with signs that say, "We want justice now," that's not justice. That's vengeance. Justice is a process, and it's time consuming, and we want justice also. But we're going to take the time for the process. What we don't have is the courageous leadership that in highly volatile situations, that the civic leaders are going to stand up and say, we are going to get to the bottom of all of this. And we will protect with gunfire your right to peacefully protest. But if you start burning stuff down and destroying the town, that's a whole nother level of law enforcement. And we don't want to go there. You ought not want to go there. And if they start busing people in from other parts of the country to burn your town down, that ought to be a special quality of felony.
Again, so much wrapped into that. I hope everybody is like hanging on to this the same way I am. And I since 2007, I think was the first time I saw you speak, and we've just kind of had this. Like Todd said it best, right? That became my Bible. And where we were in 2004, where I remember buying an obscene amount of munitions. Like, in fact, our credit card holder got in a little bit of trouble for the amount I bought, right? It was end of year funds. And I thought that I was going to train with them the way I'd been training with blanks and miles with this war of attrition mindset, right? And I was actually allowed for a period of time to train like that until I really got into your book. And I started looking at, no, this is, and we're talking, 24-year-old, whatever I was back then, Willis, right? Like an entirely different mind. And I remember saying, hey, I need this for training now because I read this book. Guys, listen, I'm telling you, I need these things. And people saying, no, we don't, that's not how we train. Like, just put it on, and we're going to go do this the way we always have. And then I got to the back of the book, right? And I said, listen, there's more to this. And so as we started really getting into the safety component of it and running the scenarios the way you've written here, and now at this point, it's become common practice. We do this. you did something. Well, okay. Thank you, Todd, for shaking your head. And then
And that's unfortunate.
There are many of us who literally, like, this is a not just because Ken Murray said to do it when, back in '04, and it has become now so ingrained in so many of us that it happens. But you're absolutely right, Todd. So many just have not grasped it. You did something though that really opened my mind, and Gary Klugowitz was involved in a lot of this early on, and there was some things happening, in the early days with Team One Network and like reality-based training. You kind of popped the top on the role of the role player in ways that no one else had. And pardon me, guys, for kind of jumping in here, but I want you to, if you can, talk us through a little bit of that, what you learned there, how you got to where you are, and remind everybody the role of the role player.
Well, the role player really is the linchpin to success or failure in any experiential learning. Unfortunately, it's usually picking up the phone on a Friday night saying, "Hey, who wants to come down and knuckle some recruits this weekend?" Right? And role players were typically SWAT guys would just sign up because it was target practice for SWAT guys, right? And they would go through inordinate amounts of ammunition. Still are. I mean, there's still some organizations across this country that shamefully utilize this stuff as a comedic or a punitive tool, which I believe borders on criminal negligence. There's a lot of people. I'll travel the country, and somebody will hear my name associated with Simunition, the company. Go, oh yeah, the Tet Offensive of '83, right? I remember you, and I sort of hang my head in shame because that was never the intention for this stuff, right? It was not supposed to be that, but we didn't know that at the time, and so we started to change the way we did things and realize that it's the role player's job to lose 100% of the time. And to be a role player, that means you're a professional loser. Now, who's got the ego strength to do that? Some police officers and some military guys do not have the capacity for that. They just can't. And so if you don't have the ego strength or capacity to lose, then don't be a role player, right? The Monty Python movie, Holy Grail, right? Everybody remembers the Holy Grail, and you see King Arthur encounters the Black Knight on the bridge, and they end up getting into this big sword fight. And he cuts one arm off, he cuts the other arm off, and one leg, the other leg. And fine, we'll call it a draw, right? Come back here, yeah, pansy, right? And that's the whole thing, is that guy, that Black Knight, is somebody that you want with you in a fight, but he's the worst role player ever, because he refuses to go down, right? We need to understand what our end state is. We need to, and we need to know that in advance, and our role player needs to know that in advance. I remember people used to ask me, well, who's better as a role player, Ken, civilians or law enforcement? Because the law enforcement guys know all the counter moves, right? And so they'll be able to outthink the officer. Yeah, but that's not their job. They're not there to compete with the student. You wouldn't do it on Aikido. You wouldn't do it in boxing. If Mike Tyson hired a sparring partner that tried to knock his ass out, number one, he'd lose. Number two, he'd never be invited back, because that's not his job. His job is to throw out challenges that Mike Tyson is trying to work on. Same thing in Aikido. You got Uke and Nage. Nage's job is to deliver. Uke's job is to fall down a lot. And it takes a year of learning how to be a good Uke in order to be the beginning of a decent Aikido stylist, right? There was a guy by the name of Jerry Peterson. Wrote a program called the SCARS system. And I remember he used to appear in the centerfold of Soldier of Fortune magazine, the most deadly fighting system known to man, too deadly for the famed Navy SEALs, right? And the Dev Group actually used his fighting system for a little while, and then they just kind of evolved beyond it, and Dwayne Dieter kind of took over the Combatives program and did a way different job. But I met Jerry, and he had this fighting system that was based on physiological responses to things that you did. If I were to poke you in the eye, Joe, I just poke you in your right eye, you would turn away from the line of center. You would raise your closest hand up, and probably your other hand up to cover it if I poke you in the eye, like that. And what that does is we already know that by taking one eye out, you lose 60% of your vision because your bifocal vision goes away, your peripheral vision starts to contract. You get this opening of the pupil, so more light gets in. That's not always necessarily a good thing. So things happen. But what he knew is that if I do this to you almost 100% of the time, I now know where to attack you. If you kick a man in the testicles, he will go up on the balls of his feet. He will bend forward at the waist. He'll grab his testicles. His chin will go up. His jaw will open. So that would be a predictable thing to do to a person. And then you'd be able to either come in with some sort of another follow up because you got an open hinge jaw. So you can do these things. Knowing what's going to happen next is a really good thing. So you can put these things into play and have predictors. In order to learn his system, he built this great big giant impact reduction suit. He was one of the first in the industry to do it, so that people could wear this suit, but they had to practice. They had to learn these behaviors on how to model the physiological responses to whatever strike was being thrown within the system. And so he had very, very tightly scripted role players. I'm going, wow, that's fascinating. And so now I need to expand that some and make sure that every single thing we're doing needs to be on purpose. And so, as we said a few minutes ago, if we're doing something with any of our tools, if we fire a taser at somebody, it's going to work, not work, kind of work, or work then be overcome. We shoot somebody with a bullet. They're either going to be dead, dying, or damaged. How they respond to that state of being isn't up to us. I just watched a video today of this female officer dealing with a homeless guy somewhere, and he homeless veteran says he's not going to follow her instructions. Starts coming at her. She pulls out a pistol and she shoots him, and just shoots him right in the chest at the close range. She shoots him in the chest, and he keeps coming. She shoots him in the chest again. And he stops coming at her. He just kind of casually shrugs, turns and walks away, about 25 feet back to where his little nest was, and then eventually falls down. But there was no demonstration of, I just shot that guy. And yet what happens in every single video scenario that I see? You fire the guns and the camera stuff, like the video ends, or you watch a target edge and then bangity 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 bang and the target edges again, we stop shooting. Or in scenarios, I see it all the time, where after the gunfire somebody's blowing the whistle, and yet that's exactly where all of the interesting things are happening. We're not teaching the collective we, the universal we, are not teaching post gunfight behaviors. We've got a set of behaviors that we call them the 4 C's: cover, condition, communication, combat, breathing. There's 17 independent things that happen within that keep you engaged to the point where you're going to be in a position of advantage, going through your 4C checklist, not approaching a subject. I see so many times that go kick the gun out of his hand or go put handcuffs on a guy just shot. No, stop it. Slow down. If I could get one patch I could put on the back of every single one of my students, it would say STFD. Slow the down. Right? Well, that's not the way it is in real life, Ken. Yeah, but we're trying to create a Rolodex card in the experiential minds of people, paint it with the right emotional paint, give them a high five, and send them out the door 6 o'clock news ready. If we're not doing that because our role player thinks it's their job to win, then we're wasting, absolutely wasting, perhaps worse than wasting, programming people for future failure because we just wanted to show them what a badass we were. And there's still countless numbers of organizations doing that. And I'll give you this, Joe. I've never met a trainer, as bad as some of them I've seen. I've never met one that was ill-intentioned, that got up in the morning and said, I want to destroy somebody for future performance today.
True.
They're just living on the peak of Mount Stupid, right? And Dunning-Kruger, and they just don't know what they're doing. Yeah. And they won't even consider reading a book like mine or taking one of my classes because I think it was Archimedes who said, you cannot teach a thing to someone they believe they already know. Yep. And when somebody says, hey, why don't you take one of those Ken Murray classes? They go, we're already doing that Ken Murray stuff. I had a group in Australia. It was funny, and I love these guys. They're a favorite son of mine. They brought me out a few times, and they said, "No, we're already doing that Ken Murray stuff. We don't need to bring him back anymore." Well, what do you mean? Well, we don't tell people they're assholes anymore. We ask them why they're such assholes. I'm going, well, that's not exactly the Ken Murray stuff. Yeah, but you said ask, don't tell. Yeah, but there's a little more to it than that. So,
Yeah.
did that help you, Joe, about the
Oh, it sure
essence of
did. Here's
importance of role play?
Brian. We're recording these, and people can go back and watch them, right?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Well,
So
it's going to be on Facebook and LinkedIn, so yeah, people can go back and watch this. This is powerful, great stuff.
it really is. And there was what I really, when I was thinking, because I've had a couple conversations with you, I knew this was not going to be an interview. It was going to be, we fire a couple quick questions at you and hang on tightly with a pen, right? Like it always is with you, because it is so powerful. But what I really wanted out of this, you gave me, which was that conversation about the role of the role player and them as a trainer. What I'd like to encourage everybody to do is just go back with a pen, if you didn't do it already, and kind of take notes on some of that and just pull out the tidbits. Also, check out the book, right? Like there's just so much in there. So yes, Ken, you did it. You answered my question, and there is so much more to that. I know there is, but I know we're kind of running here close to the end, Brian. And I don't think you've had a chance to actually ask a question yet, have you?
I'm just absorbing all the information.
Right.
No, I asked a little one before, but I want to get to one of our viewers' questions, and he asked about pain penalties. What are your
Oh,
thoughts?
that's a great question. That's a great question. Pain is a teacher. It certainly is. I believe that the pain penalty is often overused and is more valuable as a psychological deterrent than it is a physiological deterrent. Although, there's a lot of people that have been hit with these things, and remember that. But if you're in a gunfight, I've seen people. Go and watch Flint Town. There's a TV show. It's like Flint Town. Tells the story of Flint, Michigan, and in the second episode, there's a thing where they're going through the academy, and some of these guys are going through, and a couple of the students are doing some building clearing, and one of the students gets shot, and he just quits. And again, well-intentioned instructor starts talking to him. Shot ain't dead. We told you earlier, this ain't paintball. Continue on, but he was never remediated. He was just. It's sort of like even a kind instructor with a 50 caliber finger is going to leave a mark on somebody. And it's sort of like talking to a sad little bobblehead. Say, we do it to our kids, right? Go to your room and think about what you've done. Right. And so they're not going to go and sit and optimize future performance. They're going to play over and over again. The thing that they did was the thing that got them sent to baby jail in the first place. Right. And so that I'm really concerned about how people are leaving with these things. And so the pain penalty does have value. But if you think of in terms of dog training, the buried electronic fences, right? We can bury wire in our yard, and the dog will soon learn where the limits of the yard are. Right? At that point, you can disconnect the pain, right? Because he's learned the limits of the yard. What is it about? There's two useful things for a pain penalty. Number one, to correct behavior that they're just not getting, right? They're violating cover principles, violating cover principles, violating cover principles. Well, whack them, right? If they're violating cover principles in the early days, I think we've got something that we teach called the Tolley curve. Once again, if somebody comes up with something cool, I name it after them and teach it all over the world. Dan Tolley, one of my second commando regiment guys, came up with this beautiful graph, and I don't mind sharing with people that talks about crawl, walk, run, and assess. And if we're in the crawl, walk phase of training, then before they get to the point of really getting damaged with a pain penalty, I'll press the pause button. I'll think our way through this. Talk to me about your positioning. What do we learn here? Where are we standing? Hey, why don't you go take the position of the bad guy, and you go where you are and tell me what you see, right? There's a lot more pause play, a lot more interactive nature to all of this, a lot more moving the pieces around, a lot more Socratic questioning. And then as we get closer to the run and assess phase, if they're still doing that, then by all means give them a whack. But once they get shot, I want to make sure that they're staying in that gunfight, not just we shot them and the scenario's over, right? Shot ain't dead. My friend Jennifer Fulford here in Orange County, Florida, got shot 13 times in a garage by a couple of banditos that were trying to kill her. They actually disabled her gun hand. She had to do a one-hand offhand reload with bullets in her body. And through sheer determination and the training that she'd been given at Orange County Sheriff's Department, she stayed in that fight, stayed focused. But if we would have had some maniacal trainers that would shoot her and go, there, you're done, you're dead, lay down, well, then you're giving her the experience of failure. And so there's absolutely value in the psychological deterrence of a potential pain penalty. But then a lot of people will pad up so much that there's no possibility for the pain penalty anyway, right? And there's no value in hurting your student, and there's no value in hurting your role player. None. Zero. Right? And so we've done blended training where our student is actually firing blanks at our role player, and that way the role player is not seeking safety. They can stay in the fight. We can gear them down so they can look a lot more realistic. And for those who are finger to head right now going, I don't know about that, I submit for your consideration that you'd have to see it happen. Once you see it happen, you go, wow, that's absolutely magical, because the students that are shooting the blanks, it doesn't even occur to them that they're shooting blanks, because a lot of times people think, well, now the students just going to start to game it out. And how do we test accuracy, right? If we're testing accuracy with marking cartridges, again, we're on the wrong dock at that point. We can see some fall of fire, but these things don't mark that well anyway. And if you're utilizing a red mark on your role player as the value of decisive fire, we're measuring the wrong stuff, right? Just because they got little paint marks on them doesn't mean that they're out of the fight. You know, we know that if we shoot somebody with real bullets, they're dead, dying, or damaged. How they respond to that is not up to us. It's up to them, and we need to be in positions of advantage, shooting when they're still a credible threat and stopping when they're no longer a credible threat. And so the pain penalty, while has some limited value, we're actually finding a lot more value in blank training these days, with some of the blanks like Simunition makes a secure blank, and ATK and UTM make their blank versions of the round as well. But because now the role player isn't competing with you, that's where blanks fell down before. I got you first, I got you better, I got you sooner, right? There was this competition between players. And so, yeah, there is value to the pain penalty. You need to know what it is, and you need to know how to utilize it efficiently and effectively. And that just requires a little bit more thought as to what goes into that. I hope that helped your observer.
Absolutely. Got one more question from the
Yep.
viewers. So does everybody have a few more minutes? I know we usually wrap up.
I could do this all night. I was laughing. Jeff Johnsgaard's staying with me these days, and so we got things going on. I said, "Yeah, I wonder if I'm going to have enough to talk about for an hour."
He laughed at you, I'm sure.
No problem.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on virtual reality in training law enforcement?
It's a tool, and I think it's a useful tool if it stays in its lane. Can't punch a hologram. Can't lean against cover that ain't really there. I was involved with something called the FRIX, Free Roam Immersive Combat Simulation System in Australia. And it was a system that they were just starting to look at, and you'd put the VR stuff on, and you'd be in a giant warehouse. And so they could move you into this training setting and fly you in anywhere. And the graphics on it were absolutely incredible. Now, of course, it was just a first article, and so it didn't really give you the iconic availability of you and your buddy. You know, you're seeing sort of an avatar of your buddy, but with some of the things that you're interacting with, if somebody gets injured, you can't do chest compressions on a hologram. You go and you see a wall that you need to take cover on. If you lose your footing, you fall right through the wall, right? There's a lot of things here in Orlando. We've got the innovation center for a lot of the high-end simulator companies. And I see every year, I'll go to their annual conference and see some of the technology coming out. I remember that this one company had, it was like a giant hamster ball. You'd get in this thing and you got the VR goggles on, you start walking inside this giant hamster ball, and you start moving around on these ball bearings. And it's very well intentioned. They're spending lots and lots and lots of money on these things, but it really comes down to the software as to what these things are going to do, and the immersive nature of the technology. There needs to be functional fidelity, right? And so if your gun doesn't operate or fail to operate the same way yours does, then we're learning the rules of the simulator. I remember seeing some video simulators for car driving, and I got into one of these things, and I keep crashing into curbs and smashing off of stuff because there was latency in the system, and you're always trying to play catch up. So you had to learn the rules of the simulator in order to drive this pretend car well. So it didn't really teach me how to do the driving that I wanted to do with this thing. So it was more notional. So I believe that a virtual simulation, no matter how good it gets, if we stay in our lane for that and use it for the really, really valuable tool that it can be, understanding that there is absolutely no substitute for interaction between well-trained individuals, and I'm talking about like well-trained character actor role players, and delivering those winds of hate towards somebody. There's you can prime some people for that sort of thing, but what we got to make it live. We got to put people against people, I believe.
No,
Totally
I'm
agree.
right there with you. Totally agree. Um, it's a tool. It's a tool.
It's a tool, and they're all tools. Marking cartridges are a tool. Rubber guns are a tool. Theater of the mind is a tool. And if we utilize those in a blended fashion and follow the science, I hate using that phrase these days, right? Follow the science, because science has been hijacked in a lot of ways, but to actual follow the science of how people learn, and we're learning a bunch about that these days, and when we follow how people learn and design our training to teach people the way they learn, we know that block training is a failure. It doesn't teach people in a deliberate and meaningful or durable way, and yet we still keep doing that because that's the time we have. You know, if I wanted to teach someone how to gunfight, I don't want to take them for a week of firearms training. There's no durable learning there. You'd never learn a martial art, a language, or a musical instrument that way. Why do we think that we can do that with one of the most important jobs in mankind? You know, the training of those who are going to put themselves in harm's way, so that we can have affable conversations like this without, ducking bullets on any given moment.
Right.
As a firearms instructor, I agree 100% with that statement.
Thank you.
So I think we'll wrap it up. We'll go around the horn. I'll ask a question, then Todd, and Joe, and then we'll
Okay.
get through the last word. But my question is, what advice do you have to the law enforcement instructors out there that are watching tonight?
Ooh, do your absolute best to not allow them to make you a 2 or 3 year rotation. Take this seriously. Take it on as a vocation. Stay in place as long as you can. Leave. Go out. Get information from the field. Bring it back. Stay connected. But don't live in a silo. It's the law of entropy, man. You live in that one little gas bubble, and eventually it's going to shake itself apart. And so we need to go and bring new information in, which is the ILEETA conference is probably one of the finest conferences in the world that I've seen high quality training being delivered at the most affordable price ever. And so create it as a vocation. And if you can't, do it anyway, right? They're going to spin you around within your organization. Do it anyway. Take this on as a passion, as a lifestyle, and stay connected to it, and do as much as you can, changing the lives of people that you're allowed to.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks.
Todd, you're up.
So, are we going to see you at next year's ILEETA conference? And
100%.
Awesome. And what are you going to present?
Gee, I don't know. Probably
No,
something
more
in the space.
specifically.
It'll be within the reality-based training space, but here's the thing: people get reality-based training wrong, right? Anytime you ask 100 people surveyed on Family Feud what this means, and they start giving you the answers. Reality-based training is any tool, technology, or methodology that you can use in a synthetic setting to prepare for an operational setting. And so if that's a rubber gun or a virtual reality system or marking cartridges or laser beams or theater of the mind, whatever it is, that's the large aegis of reality-based training. And so it will be within that space, probably systems oriented, and trying to encourage people to really start taking a look. I mean, this is, you got best practices guidelines for, how to do this, and all of this stuff goes well beyond what the book Train at the Speed of Life does. Remember, that book is 20 years old now, and it says volume 1, but trying to write volume 2 is a pain in the ass. So it's I'm trying to make this stuff a little bit more available, and rededicated myself to trying to get more written materials out there. So it will certainly be in the RBT space, John.
Awesome. Can't wait.
Did you see
Me
Mike's
too.
comment? Did you see Mike Murata's comment about the boots? You gotta do it again next year.
Yeah, I kind of love my boots. I'm a boot and a jacket fan, so I'll try and
No
I'll try and level up, Mike.
Good deal. Hey, so you've been, you said the better part of 4 decades that you've been going at this. So a lot of history. My question is about the future. Where do you see the needs for the future of law enforcement training? And what advice would you give us as we're looking to that, next big thing, or where we're going to be 10, 15 years from now? What should we be looking at?
We need more professionalization. There's a lot of people that are death by PowerPoint guys, and there are classes available. I've mentioned Chris Butler's class. He wrote Methods of Instruction, and now Force Science is teaching that course. Sometimes with him, sometimes not with him. But it's an absolute must watch, a must attend. If you're going to be an instructor in this space. So professionalization of the instructor space. Technologies, who knows where the technology is going to take us, right? There's only so many things that you can do. Someday they might have if Elon Musk gets his way, he's going to have a port in the back of your head, and he'll be able to upload some kung fu to you. So I don't know where that goes, but I think that we need to be cautious about relying too heavily on technology, and really get back to the basics of what people are doing. And so I come back to the basics of dynamic interaction between human beings, but that has to be a lot more deliberate and on purpose, and the professionalization of the role player space. I'm trying to work on a program that allows us to author scenarios a lot more effectively online, and prepare role player behaviors a lot more effectively, and then create the capacity for storage and proliferation of these things as we can utilize technology a little bit more deliberately, because the forms that I have in the book, they'll teach you how to do a system, but they're cumbersome, and paper sucks, and we've moved beyond it. But I need a rich daddy and a bigger megaphone. So if you can find me a rich daddy, I got some ideas on how to make this stuff bigger, faster, stronger. But I'm going to keep talking about this stuff until people tell me don't. And that's going to be real hard to do, because I'll shut you down.
We'll keep on talking. We appreciate it. You got some valuable information that I think every high liability law enforcement instructor should be tapping into. And everybody, it was mentioned earlier, that book, Training at the Speed of Light, every instructor should have a copy of that, read it, highlight it, dog ear it, whatever you need to do. I need to. I just took mine off my shelf and dusted it off, so I need to review that a little bit more. So,
well, I read it about once a year to find out if there's anything that's absolutely ridiculous that needs to go, right? Because if I've got to pull some stuff out of there because I'm just flat out wrong, I'll do that. If somebody tells me that what I'm teaching is flat out wrong and they convince me, I'll change it just like that. And so far I read it once a year, and I certainly add more to it, but there's nothing I would absolutely pull out. And so it was just divine, just, hey, write this book. And it seemed to be the book. It's the book that I wanted it to be, and in many ways it stood the test of time. And so the only thing, unfortunately, that I got to change with every printing is more dead guys at the back of the book, and it just sickens me. And I have no idea how many were programming for failure out there. No clue. But I just know that unless we take this seriously and really program people for success on purpose by design, then well-intentioned trainers are going to do unintended things, and just let's go ahead and not do that.
absolutely. Any last words you have for the audience before we close this out?
If you haven't been to an ILEETA conference, please go. Just please come. Stay in touch with this organization. I've never seen a greater organization that is so well connected and so giving of all of their time. You know, you'll find if you haven't taught yet, put in an instructor proposal. One of the guys that I met at ILEETA taught his very first proposal. Miles, he was one of the Texas guys, and he taught at IADList. And so I sat in the front row and watched him teach for the very first time. And, you know, he said, "Hi, I've never done this before." And so now I'm going to do it. And he did. So show up, teach. They need proposals. Write. It doesn't have to be a long article. Write. Contribute. Please contribute. We need you, and we need you more than ever. So that's my challenge to you. Show up.
Show up.
Perfect.
Sure.
I love
Go
it.
up.
Well, Joe, Todd, Ken, we thank all of you for taking time out of your busy schedule to deliver some powerful messages, words of wisdom, some great nuggets that everybody can review this video 4 or 5 times. I know I'm going to have to. And
Me
it will
too.
be
I wonder what I said.
we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter and LinkedIn. So there's a place for you to and YouTube as well. So
Well,
we're
thanks
gonna
a bunch,
close this
guys.
out. Yeah.
All
we'll
right,
close this
Brian.
out.
Thanks so much for the invitation.
You bet.
Guys, thanks a bunch. We'll see you again soon.
Don't
Ken,
go
I'm
anywhere
gonna-
yet, Ken.
Stick around. Yeah.
Don't go anywhere.
All right.
Steph's gonna end this and
Standing
just
by.
hang on. So you all out there in Facebook, social media land, thank you for taking time out to watch us. We'll see you next month.